Welcome, everyone. I'm hoping you can hear me. My name is Tim Klinger, and I'm responsible for the Nuix business in Canada. Thank you all for joining us here today for our webinar focused on solving your data challenges with Nuix Neo. I'm here with our presenters, Stephen Stewart, that's Nuix CTO, and Chris Stevenson, Head of AI Operations at Nuix. Before we get started, I have to read the following disclaimer. This presentation and all information shared in written or verbal form has been prepared by Nuix Limited. It is given in summary form, and Nuix Limited does not warrant or represent that the information is complete, nor is the information intended to be professional or legal advice. The information is the confidential and proprietary information of Nuix, and any unauthorized use or dissemination of it is strictly prohibited. Thank you for that. Now on to something a little more interesting. Nuix as a company is evolving as rapidly as our technology. In the last year and a half, we've brought on a new CEO along with a new board and executive leadership team. We've continued to invest deeply in our technology, particularly where our customers are telling us that they have found the most value in our tech, making data mining and entity extraction faster, easier, and more efficient through AI-driven data enrichment and auto classification. As many of you know, there's been a lot of buzz in the industry around AI, with attention being drawn to ChatGPT and other generative AI solutions. But for those of you who know the full Nuix platform, especially our enterprise class Discover Review solution, we've been delivering machine learning and predictive analytics for a decade in the form of topic clustering, continuous active learning, and predictive coding. And as many of you may have witnessed, these features transformed the industry's approach to document review and analysis when they were first introduced. Today's responsible AI that leverages large language models and natural language processing is the latest evolution in that area of data science. It's hard to ignore the seismic shift that large language models have brought to the way we engage technology in daily work. These models, driven by sheer scale and computational might, they're not just tools, they're catalysts for innovation, architects of smarter systems, and importantly, the backbone of data-driven decision-making, something that we're all very familiar with. Large language models are fundamentally altering the way we approach problems, whether that's cleaning up rot and protecting intellectual property, handling data privacy and governance, conducting internal and external investigations, or early case assessment and traditional e-discovery. They have turbocharged our ability to sift through vast data troves and uncover insights with speed and precision that was once unimaginable. It's going to change the way we do everything in our industry today. What's more, once created, they can be applied to cases of any data size, small, and very importantly, large. Purpose-built LLM and NLP solutions are rapidly becoming the new norm for processing data for downstream review and analysis. And they are a huge part of our ongoing product development here at Nuix, and at the core of what we want to share with you in today's webinar. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Stephen.
For the introduction. Just a quick sound check, all good?
Here we go.
Thank you, Chris. Brilliant. So again, it's a pleasure to join, sort of to be able to sort of espouse the exciting stuff that Nuix is doing. And really it all reflects on sort of how we think about solving data problems. And again, we had a great conversation yesterday about sort of the ever increasing complexity. So for those that have known Nuix or those that sort of think about the use cases where you apply Nuix, really the pattern is very similar. Organizations, agencies, law enforcement, law firms, you name it, they all are awash with tremendous amounts of data. whether it be a regulatory inquiry, whether it be an investigation, whether it be a lawsuit, whether, as Tim referred to, rot. So the idea of going through an organization and looking for redundant, outdated, and trivial information. It all starts with large volumes of opaque data, and you're trying to make good, informed decisions. And Nuix has been at sort of the center of that for many, many years. And we've really been able to be successful because we can extract lots of data from all different types and make it searchable. The reality is, the volumes of data you are facing these days have overwhelmed the practicality of keyword search. So while keyword search is still powerful and effective, it generally leads to too many documents for you to actually review. And so if you sort of take a look at the diagram, as simple as it may be, you've got a lot of data and you're trying to get it down to the smallest amount possible for that human analyst, either that reviewer, that attorney, that law enforcement officer, where essentially you're trying to do everything you can to prioritize and drive that data. And so for years, as I said, Nuix sort of was dominated by keyword search. The reality is you need better capabilities. And so we're delivering those. And as part of Nuix Neo, and as Tim, referenced, we've had analytics for a long time. We've been doing predictive coding, all those types of great things. Now, as part of Nuix Neo, we're actually employing large language models, not ChatGPT. So this is all driven behind your firewall or on your premise, or actually wherever you choose to deploy it, to be able to help us classify, categorize, and really extract facts from all of that disparate information to drive a variety of use case centric outcomes. So everything from data privacy to things like cyber breach notification to rot cleanup and contract detection. And so basically being able to really help you find much more information about the data that you have. And so really from that collection all the way through data review and ultimately to the idea of data insight. And so Nuix has been involved in doing that. And you guys, our customers and partners, have been doing that for close to 20 years. But what you've asked us to do is really sort of focus on a couple of different areas. And so that's why I'm excited to really announce Nuix Neo, how we think about sort of bringing together our consolidated platform. And with Nuix Neo, we really focus across three dimensions, making it faster, smarter, and easier. And so the faster is, how quickly can we basically get you to eyes on data? And how quickly can we get you to the right data? So it's not just how quickly is it available for search, but how can we leverage AI and ML to really point you at the documents that matter most, or the items or the data that matters most? And so we think about that. It's about how do we essentially reduce that through things like automation, through the AI, but ultimately then how do we also scale that out wider? Because ultimately the volumes of data are increasing and really trying to drive that process further, faster. And so obviously, as data volumes increase, so too do the complexities of workflow. And so when we think about the idea of making it easier, there are lots of aspects of easier. Some is just as simple as reducing the friction. So if I have a whole bunch of different jobs that I need to run, how do I automate that end-to-end process? And also part of Nuix Neo, not only do you have the engine and investigate and you've got workstation, you also now have Nuix automation. And Nuix automation allows you to automate those end-to-end workflows. And so that idea of being able to just essentially let the machines chew 24/7 to be able to execute those workflows, making that data or taking that data from its source, whether it's PSTs or forensic images or mobile data or office shares, you name it, churn that through, extract the text, run it through Nuix NLP for categorization, classification, risk scoring, fact extraction, and ultimately lead you to sort of what is the ultimate goal, which is allowing you to really skip right to the answer. And so with that in mind, it's also sort of easier, so we spend a lot of time, and the industry spends a lot of time talking about data science and large language models and AI and ML. And it's all sort of, in some ways, it almost seems like voodoo, or you need a very specific skill set, a data scientist or a data engineer, to be able to take advantage of it. One of the great things about Nuix Neo is really what we just call our no-code model builder. And that essentially brings all of that sort of data science capability, but delivers it to you at your fingertips through a no-code UI. So you actually can take the existing models that we have, augment them, add new models, build them to be customer specific or client specific or project or industry. So it's really that idea of being easier to provide the flexibility to allow you to get the most out of AI and ML. And so again, the last piece on that, the smarter, so we talked about faster, easier, and smarter. How do I again take all of this capability, but basically it's really skip to the answer. And so as part of Nuix Neo, we allow you to run AI and the NLP capabilities across all of the data. So if we think about sort of, where Nuix has come from as you're buying components, you might be buying some workstation or investigator ECC, or, sort of the full feature discover review platform. And if you're running it on premise or you're running it in the SaaS, Nuix offers, a variety of different components. But with Nuix Neo on the engine side, it's about really giving you that end-to-end experience from ingestion through automation, enrichment with AI, and then ultimately the ability to sort of take that quick, easy look with Nuix Investigate to get your eyes on the data as quickly as possible to sort of really drive that investigative side of things. And then when the time is right, to be able to take a curated, efficient set and basically promote that to Discover, where you can bring in additional eyes and really run a rigorous workflow with all of the auditing and all of the other additional analytics to help sort of drive those discovery, investigative, regulatory response outcomes. And so really that idea of going faster, smarter, and easier to really sort of push and pull that is really at the core of Nuix Neo. When we think about that, it's how do we deliver essentially not just features and functions, but really focus on how to deliver outcomes. And so to kind of replay that, all the data runs through the Nuix engine, extracts the text and metadata. We then run it through our AI layer. We just happen to call that AI layer Nuix NLP. And really, just as it says, it helps you to really start to understand the data. And so when we say understand, it actually is essentially reading and understanding textual content as if a human would. And we do that through employing our own large language model. So similar in idea and technology to ChatGPT, but without all the security concerns, without all of the risk of sending data out to the cloud. We actually build and curate our own language-specific large language models, which we build our classifiers on, which we build our categorization on, and that we use for fact extraction. And so as you go from sort of left to right, you've got data is normalized, it's then essentially structured. And so we take free text and we help structure it by extracting facets and aspects of it. And then essentially what that leads to is really deriving specific workflows, specific outcomes. So as I said earlier, everything from data privacy to cyber breach notification to looking at consumer complaints correlation across multiple different silos. But the whole idea is all of these capabilities are available as part of Nuix Neo. So you can really sort of drive that very efficient end-to-end stack. And when you think about driving that efficient end-to-end stack, it's really important to think about how do you scale that. And so we can scale everything from sort of running on essentially the smallest unit would probably be one physical device with two VMs, but sort of you've got the all-in-one and then sort of the NLP adjacent to it. And then you can start to think about scaling out each of the individual components. So how do I scale out and sort of, get process isolation? So I may have investigate and automation and NLP all separated with sort of a large file server. Do I have greater processing demands? So maybe I scale out the automation nodes, or maybe I have greater search demands and need to be able to burst to a larger set. So I start to think about scaling out the number of investigate nodes and potentially transition up to Elasticsearch as my back end. But so the whole idea sort of with all of this, again, in that pathway of trying to go faster, smarter, and easier, it's really ultimately driving you towards that end objective of how can I sort of drive all of this unknown, opaque information and again, deliver solid outcomes. And so again, the driver behind Nuix Neo platform is really to sort of make all of this stuff much easier as part of a single consolidated platform. And as part of sort of one of the tenets of faster, smarter, and easier, it's the idea of automation. And so again, with automation, it's the ability to not just automate simple tasks, but also to build out somewhat complicated workflows built off a library of pre-existing activities. So again, the idea of being able to load the data, ingest it, run a report, dedupe, date filter, run a search in tag exceptions, create a production set, send it out to NLP for enrichment. Well, most importantly, do this time and time again. So if you're an existing workstation customer, you'll never have to basically wait for a task to finish to start the next one. And you can build out your templates. You can control who has access to edit a template. You can control the profile. So sort of what are your ingestion settings? How do you do your imaging? How do you do your OCR? And so again, take all of those different elements that are associated with really doing the weedy elements of uh, text and metadata extraction, driving that workflow, and really push it into a consistent and repeatable fashion such that your analysts or operators can basically point at the data, kick the go button, and off it runs, and basically queue those jobs up. So again, multiple jobs running concurrently, all managed by automation, running an end-to-end workflow that can either output into a Nuix case, and then you can go in and analyze it with Nuix Investigate, or you could push it downstream, doing either a legal export or even promote to discover. So the idea of really sort of running this in as much of a headless fashion as you desire, and sort of push large volumes of data through Nuix Neo very, very quickly. One of the elements that sort of again ties to sort of the smarter is this notion of AI for all. And so we speak to it in terms of classification, categorization, and risk scoring. And so classification and categorization, it's what is a document or what is it about? Fact extraction is being able to pull specific things like PII or PHI or Bitcoin addresses or email addresses or pretty much you name it out of the data and essentially turn it from unstructured information into structured fielded data that becomes searchable or exportable in either Investigate or Workstation or exported out as part of a load file. And so what you see here is basically what we just call the text editor. And this is essentially the text editor within the Nuix Neo model builder. And the Nuix Neo model builder really allows subject matter experts to get in and tune the models themselves. So the UI or the screenshot that you're seeing up here now isn't something that every user would use. This isn't like a workbook where they sort of go into every single document. This is the model builder where your subject matter experts go in and basically tweak and tune the models again through the no code UI, understand what they're getting, how they're getting it, and essentially infuse their knowledge and wisdom into repeatable workflows. One of the important distinctions that I like to make is oftentimes in sort of the analytics space. Organizations think of analytics like TAR and CAL, which are invaluable for e-discovery and review and being able to drive to a responsive set. But one of the challenges with those is the portability of those models. I can't readily move, and now it is possible in some instances, but I can't readily move the decisions and the learning that has been infused into that model to a different matter or a different project, or I can't move it almost to an entirely different company if you're a service provider or consultant. With Nuix Neo and Nuix NLP, each one of these models and all of the sort of micro models are portable. And because instead of building the models based off the corpus, so instead of building a model that is sort of responsive to the emails and the documents in the data set, we actually build the models off our large language model. And so what that means is these are portable. So if I build a great model that finds tax documents, or I build a great model that is really tailored to finding a certain type of contract, or a specific Canadian health record, or a defense document, you name it. If you have domain expertise and subject matter expertise, and you're looking for certain things every single time, it's really easy to build those models and then use it on every single set of data that you process. And essentially, that idea of skipping to the answer. Look, if I know that every time I load data, I want to look for contracts or I want to look for sensitive information, it's all about being able to leverage that AI. And essentially, Nuix Neo gives you an easy way to do that. And this is sort of the text editor for that. One of the other things is sort of, again, taking that next level of depth. And Chris Stevenson will touch on this when we think about explainability and specificity, is sort of how do I tune and tweak these models? So much data science today, you sort of have this idea of, are people building in bias with their training data? How are they sort of, driving these things to sort of understand this? And what are sort of all of the tools and tricks and levers that they have? And so most of the time, organizations and data engineers spend a huge amount of time trying to develop the corpus and essentially then feed it through and then see how the classifiers work. And then they try to then adjust the corpus to get a different classifier. That is a tremendous, arduous process, tremendously arduous process. And sort of my favorite data point on that is we actually had an organization that was using Nuix NLP, or actually more specifically, Topos Labs, and they were uh, a social media platform that was built specifically for armed services members and veterans. And they had a significant challenge with service members, both active duty and retired, with the idea of self harm. And so they were working with some of the best and brightest minds in both data science as well as mental health, and they were getting so so results. The reason why they were probably getting so so results is the stresses on military veterans are very unique. And also, the vernacular and the language of military veterans is also very unique. So you can imagine if I have a mental health expert from, that deals with youth self harm, that's a very different language. Actually, the words used to express fear and doubt and uncertainty than a combat veteran. And so when we sort of stacked up sort of experts in data science, experts in mental health, and the models they were building, or more accurately, the results they were getting against Nuix NLP with our no code model builder, and most importantly, the content moderator from the social media company. Essentially, he was able, not a technician, not a data scientist, but schooled in the language that was used by their target audience, was able to come in and basically tweak and tune the models. And so the screenshot, that long-winded story really speaks to the approachability and the simplicity in which subject matter experts can come in and tune these models. They can weight different aspects to become more significant as it relates to sort of how we might score a confidentiality or non-disclosure agreement, and the language, and how that language is used contextually to start to drive that and understand that. And so again, the idea of really being able to sort of get in there and not just sort of say, oh, there's AI, it must be doing something smart, but really to materially impact the outcome based off sort of the types of data you're after. And again, I kind of always skip over this. A ton of this stuff comes out of the box. So again, it's also not a clean slate that you have to start from zero. We have several hundred different classifications, several hundred different categories. We come with a variety of different, we call fact extraction. And so this idea here that I'm showing you, the compound lexemes, is really the best way to think of it is regular expressions or contextualized regular expressions. You know, one thing that we're sort of seeing a lot of interest in is organizations that are trying to do cyber breach notification reporting, and they're relying on regular expressions to find PII and PHI. And obviously, regular expressions are really powerful, but they also cast a really broad net and bring in a huge number of false positives. And so that huge number of false positives really lends itself to something like compound lexemes. And what compound lexemes allow you to do, and again, we ship with a whole load of them out of the box, is essentially wrap context around that root anchor. So it might be a credit card number regex, but just in the whatever 16-digit number is likely to lead to a false positive. So what we do is we essentially wrap that with logic. And so you can see here we have ordered, so essentially this block has to happen in sequence with this block, and we have unordered blocks, and we want this lexeme. And so sort of here in the center part, where it says credit card number, this isn't just looking for the words credit card number. This is looking actually for, I think it's probably like 100 different tokens and phrases around credit cards. So American Express, Visa, you name it, from an international perspective. But then it also looks to how those words are used in context. So it's not just souped up keywords, but it's really about understanding how language relates and how the sequencing of words unfolds to be able to understand how you can sort of predict and classify this. So again, it's all very much based off the same core technology, that large language model, which really understands how language is structured, the sequences of words and what they mean. We're not using it to generate, my son's homework. We're using it to basically accurately classify and categorize that information, as well as to extract the relevant facts, so that you can then start to do better stuff with it, or more interesting stuff with it. And so when we think about doing more interesting stuff, we think about things like risk and group priority. So when I said sort of about working smarter, the idea of really being able to skip right to the answer. So in almost any aspect, you could look at something as simple as uh, Google is probably the best example. When you run a Google search, they have statistics of how many times you go back and sort of select the second hit. That most of the times you're sort of comfortable with the first hit that comes back from Google. Well, they do that with sort of a whole litany of AI and ML to be able to sort of page rank and prioritize. But when you run a search for a discovery or investigation, wouldn't it be amazing if the system was able to put the item that we thought was most significant or most risky or most important as the first one in the list? And so we do is we sort of take again, and I kind of go back to that sort of the fourth element on that, which is the risk scoring piece. And so risk scoring is a really sort of powerful idea that essentially maps to prioritization. And so if you're doing a cyber breach notification or you're doing data privacy, the number one risk may be personally identifiable information. But now, sort of as an example, uh, a a W-2 form, which is essentially a U.S. citizen's tax form, and you filled that out, or you essentially found that on a file share. NLP would allow you to categorize that as a tax form, but it may give it a low risk score because it's just a blank form. But now, if NLP detects that not only is it a W-2 form, but it actually contains PII, so it contains Social Security numbers, it contains addresses, it contains financial information, etc. All of a sudden, that W-2's risk score rises. And now imagine I find a PDF file that has 250 W-2 files. All of a sudden, now you're taking not only what type of document it is, but the fact that that document contains PII, but you're also now looking at the density of that PII. How many incidents of PII exist within that specific file? And you sort of take all of those building blocks, and it essentially lends itself to this idea of being able to give things a risk score. And so we assign risk scores based off how we've thought of it. But again, most importantly, you can actually tailor that, because it doesn't just have to be risk. It could be significance, it could be importance. But the idea is being able to aggregate multiple different enrichments. So type of document, what is the document about? What is the document type? What's the type of content, we extracted facts, etc. And use that to generate an aggregate score, all with the idea of helping point you to the answer more quickly. And so that idea of being able to get through it faster, being able to automate the process, and really being able to drive that outcome really sort of lends itself to a whole manner of different use cases. And so, sort of in one of the previous slides, you talked about like the killer apps. One of the other great things is now that we can extract all that text and metadata from 1,000 different file types, different archives, you name it, we can make that information searchable. So again, I kind of skipped past this a couple times, but again, the idea is, again, it's the same Nuix engine. So we're talking about it in terms of Neo, but it's the same Nuix engine, that's highly capable of extracting text and metadata and making it searchable. As part of Neo, you can then easily interact with it with Nuix Investigate. So you have a single sign-on across Investigate and automation, being able to go into NLP, and again, being able to interact and look at the data. So it's not just about an analytic, or oftentimes your organizations have analytics that drive a dashboard, but it's actually about an integrated system that allows you to automate a process, work with the data itself, be able to then visualize statistical information across that information, being able to essentially go in, prioritize what is the most important, deliver that as part of a dashboard, either one that we build or one that you can build, about something like Power BI, but then also start to understand the relationships in that information. And so again, over the years, we've been asked numerous different times, I have this information and there's sort of a series of facts contained in all of these different documents. How do I understand how these documents are related? Is there commonality? And so you can do things like clustering, so what is it, how much similar text is there? But really with the idea of being able to do link analysis and build a well curated knowledge graph. So organizations are always trying to come into us with, well, I have all of this free text. How do I start to, pull out information like who's related to who? Are there common phone numbers, et cetera? We can now do that tremendously efficiently with Nuix Neo. And it has a lot to do with being able to leverage those compound lexemes to do really highly accurate fact extraction. Once you do that highly accurate fact extraction, you can populate a graph. And once that graph database is populated, you can then start to ask all manner of different types of questions of the data. What is the number of hops between this specific phone number and a known bad guy? Or where all do these tax IDs locate? And does all of the tax IDs locate with, associated with one person, but that one person shares a phone number with another person that is on the known bad list? And so again, once you have that information available to you, you can start to do all sorts of different use cases. And the key is these technologies have existed before, but by bringing all of them together in Nuix Neo, such that I can extract that text, essentially make it searchable, I can run it through an integrated NLP AI ML layer that you yourselves as subject matter experts can augment, provides again a tremendous differentiation for how you can sort of really harness the capability of AI, view it in a dashboard for risk scoring and prioritization, and then ultimately understand those relationships all in a virtuous platform, we think is incredibly powerful. And so when we think about sort of the power of Nuix Neo and going along the dimensions of faster, smarter, and easier, and really sort of driving that, we're really focusing on outcomes and solutions. And so our roadmap is starting with what we released in July 1st of this year is data privacy. We started with data privacy because it's really sort of core to us around how we can extract large volumes of text and metadata, how we can understand the PII, PHI, how we can do the risk scoring, and how we can elevate that to sort of say, look here first. That lends itself to things like rot remediation and things like cyber breach notification, where I have a huge amount of information that I have to cull through very, very quickly, and then ultimately prioritize that into, hey, these are the documents that we need closer attention because we now need to start to build out the notification list. Next off the ranks will be Nuix Investigate, or will be in Neo for investigations. And so our focus on investigations is continuing to sort of evolve our AI and ML, but instead of looking for document types or classification, start to point that more in the direction of fraud. How can we leverage things like pressure, rationalization, and opportunity from sort of Cressy's theory to basically augment and build models that essentially can give you essentially a dimensionally score for something like fraud? Because these items are here, how do we sort of scale that or scope that? Similarly, within the investigations, a lot of effort is going into being able to take advantage of the link analysis. Where do these phone numbers exist? Where do these bank account numbers exist? Is there common correlation between an individual person? Does that person have multiple different phone numbers, multiple different email addresses? Do they also have a different addresses? And again, how can you start to think about investigating fraud, not just from the content itself, or more importantly, not by having to read every document, but being able to see relationships, being able to look at that across time, being able to take, if there's GPS coordinates or address references in free text, to actually plot that on a map to be able to understand, is there a correlation that all of these insurance claims are all from the same address, or all of these insurance claims are all taking place on the same block? An analyst wouldn't necessarily be able to draw that conclusion by reading it. But with AI and ML and the fact extraction, we can then pull those things out. We can start to cluster them and think about that. And then again, as we continue beyond, it's how do we sort of bring all of this high efficiency to legal processing to be able to accelerate that? Think about conceptual search and all of the other different analytic capabilities that really sort of drive and accelerate your outcomes. And so with all sort of that as the backdrop, we talk about how it works. We talk about the outcomes. We talk about all the things that you can do with it. In this day and age, there's every bit as much concern about sort of, forgive me, the Skynet scenario, where essentially AI is becoming more powerful, or we lose control, or there's intrinsic, or there's bias built into the models. Things like facial recognition, and how effective is it? All of this is generating tremendous amount of global conversation about how do you manage AI in an ethical construct? How do you ensure that the machines are doing the bidding of the people? That sounds very sort of Terminator-esque, but sort of how do you keep your arms around it? And so with that, Chris Stevenson, our head of AI operations, has really been sort of leading Nuix in the thinking about how we do this, our involvement in the global community. But really, with that, Chris, I'd like to turn it over to you to sort of give us your thoughts on, essentially how we're thinking about taking our tech and really ensuring that you've got the transparency, specificity, and explainability that the globe needs to make sure that we're getting the best possible result.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm always amazed at how much material there is to go through in this 1 hour. I'm confident, and Tim, who introduced us and kicked this off at the beginning of the hour, I'm sure you would agree this could easily be a 1 or 2 day event. But thanks all of you for joining, and thanks, Stephen, for that wind up here. I want to go over a little bit of the responsibility that we have as custodians of artificial intelligence. And in the context of that, which has led to something that I'm referring to lately as regulation Geddon. Everyone has a Geddon these days. I guess this is my Geddon. But you can see, and I'm sure we're all very familiar with, in fact, there's recent regulation been suggested in the Canadian government that wraps around the data privacy bill that's already been out there. And it's across the board. So the 3 that we have begun to build and deepen our AI policies around they cover our general footprint, inclusive of the emerging Canadian regulations. But the primary ones we started with are the NIST in the US, the European Union's AI Act, and the Australian government's, where our company is headquartered, the artificial intelligence ethics framework that's based in Australia. But there are at least in the United States, 25 states that have already proposed bills. 14 states have already actually adopted legislation. This is a global phenomenon. And if those of you who are familiar with the GDPR situation with the data privacy, fascinating because how important privacy is to all of us, but it took quite a bit of time, I would say a good decade, for organizations to actually partake and take seriously the privacy aspects of data. Well, if you consider how quickly then AI has been addressed by these regulations and how quickly these regulations are emerging, it's incredible. And it's really due to both the power and the challenges and risks and opportunities that come from this very powerful technology. So with that as the baseline, we have really been fortunate to have a technology, an AI, that we base our capability on, that has some embedded capabilities in it that really lend itself to what we call responsible AI or ethical AI. And the first and foremost, in terms of generating the trust, and I think at the first slide there really underscores this concept of trust, is the idea of explainability and transparency. So not only is it, can you explain how this algorithm works? Can you explain how you're getting to this outcome, these results, these predictions, which are very important in themselves, and kind of addressed in this notion of a black box, which has traditionally been sort of the obstacle people have around adoption of AI and the trust of AI is, How is it getting to that answer? Not only that, but how is the data being, what is the data that's being used to train these outcomes? There are classic cases of facial recognition, or recognizing, perhaps in the driverless car scenario, where the training data used to identify whether people were falling asleep or becoming drowsy at the wheel recognized very quickly that there were some missing parts of the population that were missing from that data set. And so the technology was not trained in an ethical and open manner that covered the general populace. And so that's just one small example. But I guess the simple example, garbage in, garbage out, really applies here. So not only how the algorithms are doing what they're doing, but what is the data that's being used to train it? And how do I show that? How am I transparent about that? And if you think about it, the larger the language model, and they're continuing to grow and grow and grow, the less likely, the less possible it is to even be able to explain the data that was being used to train that model. So there's this chicken and egg thing we have going on with explainability and transparency. With, as Stephen mentioned, our data uses a much smaller and targeted language model approach that can be on-prem, can run on CPU rather than expensive GPU, and most importantly, it can be explainable to anyone who needs it. So it starts with explainability and transparency to deliver that trust. And that's a foundational element of our AI. Happy to talk to anyone on this call. If you want to set up a time to talk, we can get deeper into that. So that's number one. The second is something we're calling explainability. Accessibility. We just covered explainability. Accessibility really gets to that control. Stephen mentioned it, the Skynet and Terminator memes that we have around AI. Putting this in the hands of humans and allowing the human to be in control. Now, Stephen showed some of these, they're on the screen now, but showed some of these in his previous slides, that the human domain expert doesn't need to be a data scientist, doesn't need to be an engineer. The person closest to the data, who understands the data, can come in. They have access to the knobs and levers that allow them to adjust and tweak the models, making sure they can identify and eliminate bias. They can validate the models against real world scenarios, so they can ensure that the efficacy is going to be strong, that the bias is going to be eliminated, and that the outcomes are truly going to meet what they want them to meet. So it's that human in control that's kind of our second of three legs of the stool, and is part of our responsible and ethical AI capability. And then the third, I think, is really interesting because it kind of gets pitted up against the concept of the general AI that you get from an OpenAI, a ChatGPT, a Bard, which are really meant for that kind of generative piece, right? So it's all comers come in, ask any question on the planet, which really creates the need, if you will, to fill and use as big a data set as you can possibly find of all subject matters and every parameter under the planet, to try to generate textual responses, almost written like a human. And our focus is not on that at all. Obviously, as an AI company, we are going to utilize generative AI when needed and in very targeted and specific ways. But the things that our customers need in law enforcement and legal really starts to center in on, what am I trying to do? And it's been one of the biggest focuses most recently on, as AI is running away and technology is really outstripping the speed of the AI adoption and how quickly it's being taken on in terms of what it can do. There's a frightening pace to it. And the idea here is that we need the chickens to come home to roost here. We need to be able to focus on what is the outcome and address these things in a specific targeted way to get a specific outcome. And that's why having specificity as part of our core is really key. So we're not trying to be all things to all people. We're allowing our customers to set the pace on what they need to do. And we're really allowing this to be kind of a bite-sized approach to tackle real-world problems in a pragmatic way that avoids some of those big eyes on a huge project that really never gets appropriately adopted. And we've seen this over and over and over again. The biggest problem and biggest challenge with AI is often that the goals are too big and not specific enough to be adopted and actually deliver real-world results. So those three areas, explainability, which handles the trust, the accessibility, which puts the human in control and really allows you to build human-centric AI, and then the specificity really drives this concept of the accuracy and defensibility of the outcomes, which many of our customers really demand and require for their jobs. Particularly, we've heard this from law enforcement and legal, any highly regulated industry. So those are the three things and the three ways in which we have based it on. Now, there are many others, including data privacy, including general safety, accountability. Those are things that we consider table stakes as part of our responsible and ethical AI capabilities. But the three that I think that stand out, that I think a lot of organizations are missing when they skip right to the generative AI as the kind of get out of jail free card, I think they're missing the boat on these three areas. And it's something that our customers are going to get out of the box as part of an integrated strategy to solve real world problems with AI and machine learning, and slowly over time adopt in a meaningful, thoughtful, and careful way some of those larger, higher minded and newer capabilities in generative AI. So with that, I think that covers the three key ones I wanted to go over. I think I'll just end my piece here on one slide. And Stephen, if you could just push to the next slide. It's this idea of bringing it all back to trust. You know, at our recent user conference, we had a global user conference back in April called Accelerate. And the former chairman of our board, Jeffrey Bleich, who is also former U.S. ambassador to Australia and currently serves as the chief legal counsel over at Cruise, which is a self-driving, driverless car company out in San Francisco, gave an incredibly impassioned discussion on the subject of trust and how technology, truth, and trust really combine in a powerful way. And the quote that really got me was, "The greatest source of all human security is trust." So it's foundational. It's in the fabric of a society that has trust in it. And as technologists, and again, purveyors of AI, we take this really to heart, and it's at the core of what we do. So with that, I will basically thanks again for your time. I think it's a great topic, and we look forward to discussing all of this further with any of you who wants to learn more and to continue our journey together as our customers and partners. Thank you very much.
I guess there was one thing. There's one thing that I quickly wanted to touch on before we sort of proceed into the questions. And so on this slide, you're actually you're talking about specificity and accuracy and defensibility. And I actually wanted to call everyone's attention to actually some of the technical weeds. And I guess the technical weeds on that is if you sort of see in the lower right-hand corner, the human resources. The human resources element, that is what we call a skill set. And essentially that is a type of document that we have classified. And so the reason why we have these visuals is very much around there's a tremendous amount of information that is basically pushed onto these documents so that they can be searched, so that they can be explored, so that we can manage this. And so the reason why I highlight this specific document is really in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see a bunch of numerical values. So oftentimes classifiers will be called like a binary classifier, and they'll say it either is a confidentiality or non-disclosure agreement or not, or an employee contract or not. And so it's a one or a zero. What Nuix Neo does is it actually gives you a relevant confidence score. And so what that means is that this specific example, we are 0.98% confident that it is a confidentiality or non-disclosure agreement. And so what that means is when you're thinking about trying to find the data, you're not blindly trusting the AI. So again, very much to the heart of what Chris was talking about, the specificity, the explainability. Like we haven't just said, here's the thing, it's a confidentiality agreement with no context. We say we are 98% confident that this is a confidentiality agreement. And then in the over left-hand side, where it says 0.95, essentially you can easily adjust that filter. So it's not that the system is saying it is or it isn't. We are giving you a graded scale that you can dial into. So if you want to start with what it thinks is the most likely, set that scale to 0.95, run your search, and you'll find the ones that are higher than 0.95. You can then easily adjust that scale without any reprocessing, without any reindexing, without any additional work, and adjust that down to 0.8, 0.7, 0.6, and keep essentially running those queries to broaden the scope of what you've got. And so that very simple idea of really being able to understand not only the scores, but not be locked into just what the score is, gives you a lot of flexibility around how you could think about leveraging this. And again, having the confidence that it's not a this or a that or a one or a zero, but again, that shaded scale that really is just about accelerating your ability to get to the answers you need and not making you reliant on the system to score it with 100% confidence, because that's impractical. But so it's about giving you all the tools and techniques to be able to find the stuff that you need the fastest first. And so I just wanted to kind of add that last piece before we sort of take a couple of questions. Chris, Tim, do you guys have anything to add before I sort of tick off some of the questions?
No, I thought that was great. A great pickup at the end, Stephen. But no, I have nothing particular to add.
Okay, cool. One of the questions that came in, was, we obviously showed the user experience in English, but what if I have a different language? If I need French or I need Portuguese or I need Russian or German or Spanish. So we obviously showed you our large language model in English, but we have large language models, in other languages as well. We have German, Spanish, Russian. We actually have large language models for, I think, Arabic, Hebrew, French, Portuguese. The difference is that we don't have the same depth of out-of-the-box models. Just because we don't have native speakers in all of those languages. But once you have the large language model, you can easily and quickly build out models in a very simple fashion using our no-code user experience. So again, the idea is once the large language model is built, you can build out all of those models in a relatively easy fashion if you are a native speaker and have access to, sort of language docs in that language, but you just don't have quite the same out of the box. One of the other questions that came in is, there's a lot of experience with sort of e-discovery centric AI and ML, and sort of, how is this different? How is this different than sort of like AI and ML that's used in review? This is really very much focused on being able to push it further to the left. So Nuix is sort of always thinking about how much AI and how much intelligence can we push as far left as possible. So for every data set that you run through Nuix for text and metadata extraction or for indexing, you might as well score it for contracts or score it for risky content, or be able to look and find contracts across all of the data or any of the 100 other data types. Or maybe you're interested if people are using aggressive or abusive language, or you're interested in sentiment. All of those different things are models that can be applied, and again, applied to every single set that you run through, and then go from there. Let's see, another question. Let's see, this one. So the question is, while Chris spoke of AI features and trust being out of the box, most of our firm's clients don't want software boxes, but instead SaaS services. When will Neo NLP AI be offered in SaaS and or packaged with Discover? So that's actually a great question. So interesting. A lot of our customers do actually want it behind the firewall. So we're exploring sort of the SaaS offering, as well as being able to include the NLP scores into Discover. We're working sort of through that actively now, but just for into all transparency, since Nuix serves a wide range of clients, from law firms to service providers to law enforcement to corporations, we actually we lean towards a run it where you want it flavor. So if you run it behind the firewall, you can do that, and that's actually sort of the first configuration that we've supported. The next question was, can NLP apply to OCR text from images and non-searchable PDFs? So yes. So sort of when I showed the workflow, let's sort of click back here. So when I showed the workflow, you may have noticed this sort of one right in the middle, optical character recognition. So I can ingest my data, extract the text and metadata. I can then run an OCR across really whatever document types I define. So you can define non-searchable PDFs. You could do all of your images. You can do it however you want. And then sort of it's not shown, but then a downstream process would be able to essentially send all of that extracted text and metadata over to NLP for scoring. And so obviously, I just want to be clear, mileage will vary with the quality of the OCR. So generally speaking, non-searchable PDFs, they're actually pretty good, because essentially a non-searchable PDF in most instances was probably generated by a computer. Similarly, images, you kind of get sort of, depending on the aspect ratio, and if it's sort of like an actual photograph, that's a much harder thing to OCR. That relies on a slightly probably different technology of sort of, image categorization and classification. But so again, any textual data that you can get into Nuix, you can run through NLP. The one thing that I would categorize or sort of caveat is we have seen OCR of scanned documents can be terrible, just because the quality of the scan is terrible. So again, mileage will vary, but sort of at its basic, it's a yes, because if you can get the text, you're good to go. So I guess it looks like that was our last question. And so, Tim, I don't know if I would kick it over to you to sort of bring us home, or I can wrap this up.
I just wanted to add one comment to the first question that you asked, or that was asked, about what's the differentiator between other technologies that are being used in the space today. And there were three that came to mind on top of what you had already said, Stephen. And one is where in your process you can apply the technology, the Nuix NLP, or the auto classification, starting right there. So the flexibility of where and when you apply it is driven and built into our solution, number one. Number two, as Chris said earlier, the explainability and transparency of this solution, which really relates to the trust in the results, trust in the way the AI has been designed and how it's being delivered, and trust in the human interaction that takes place in defining and refining the models, narrowing, instead of the very, very large language models that some of these bigger solutions, like we've discussed, ChatGPT and others, are relying on. We have a very specific data set that can be used to create the models. And those can be relevant to the domain, relevant to the case, relevant to an industry. You, as the user, define what is going to be relevant for a particular model. And that's what's that's a huge differentiator. Chris, would you agree?
Absolutely. That's great. Yep. The user interface is unique, and it makes it easier to use and bring that capability to domain experts on site. So those are the key ones. There are many others, but we don't have time to go through that.
No, we're at the top of the hour. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Really appreciate your attention. Clearly, we have a lot more to talk about as it relates to this subject. We want to show you the technology. We want to give you a demonstration of it in action so you can see it live. Just give us a shout. You can reach out to me, Tim Klinger. My information is actually on our website, or you can reach me in LinkedIn. If you have my information, please do reach out, or reach out to Chris or Stephen if you have their information as well. So thanks again, and we'll look forward to talking to you again sometime in the near future.